Okay, so we will be starting off today's Monday episode of the Zach Kroll Sports Podcast the same way that we start every Monday college basketball episode of the Zach Kroll Sports Podcast, and that is with my top 10 takeaways from the week of the college basketball season, week 2. Boys, hit the music. Here we go. Takeaway number 1. The Texas Longhorns are a legitimate top 8 team and a team to watch out for. If you missed it, on Friday's show, I did a whole segment discussing the Longhorns and just how impressive their run during the Maui Invitational was, and how also I thought that there is a possibility that this Texas team could be different than all of other Shaka Smart's Texas teams throughout the past couple years. The pressure is on for this guy. He has to get the job done, and luckily for him, this could be the most talented team he's had since he's gotten to Austin, Texas. We saw them blow out Indiana. We saw them get the win over Davidson during Maui, and then they get the buzzer beater win over North Carolina. But just in case you guys wanted something to confirm it, they did go head-to-head with Villanova yesterday. And that was a game that if the ball bounces one or two different ways, they easily could have won. So for the first time in a while, I do think there is some legitimate optimism around this Texas Longhorn squad, and they deserve a lot of credit. Kai Jones, Matt Coleman, Courtney Ramey, and just the overall depth, along with Greg Brown, that this Texas team has, along with the length and the athleticism, it's really impressive. And I think they deserve a lot of credit for the job they were able to do really throughout the week. Those were 4 tough games, and they got the job done. Let's stay in the state of Texas, and takeaway number 2. Props to the Houston Cougars, because I feel like this is a team that no one is talking about that is kind of similar to Texas in the sense that this could be Kelvin Sampson's best team since he's gotten to Houston. And we all know Houston has had some really good teams over the last couple of years. They've made NCAA tournaments. They've won tournament games. They've been to a Sweet 16. So Houston is legitimately good. And I think the way this program is developing is really good for the sport of college basketball, having a consistent team in the American Athletic Conference getting the job done. And Houston on Saturday was missing their head coach, Kelvin Sampson, their assistant coach, top one, in Kellen Sampson, his son. They were also missing the preseason American Athletic Player of the Year in Caleb Mills and Marcus Sasser, who is another one of their starting guards. And if you ask Houston Cougar fans, he is one of the best players on that squad. And still, even though they were at home, I get it, they somehow found a way to get a win over a really tough South Carolina team that was playing desperate because they were coming off an embarrassing loss. So at the same time, I think Houston used their culture to get that win. Quentin Grimes, DeJon Jarreau, the freshman Trevon Mark. Remember that kid's name, Trevon Mark, He could really play. He's a top 100 recruit. I even watched Houston up close against Texas Tech, and I was super impressed. They're a team that I'm going to have, I feel like, ranked much higher in my top 25 than the actual AP poll does. But I don't care about the AP poll. That's a phenomenal job by Houston getting the job done, and they're a legitimate top 5 team in my opinion. The way they've played through the first 2 weeks, they deserve a lot of credit. Shout out to Kelvin Sampson and the Cougs. Takeaway number 3. I'll give you guys another sleeper team to watch. This is in the SEC, and it's the Missouri Tigers. The Tigers are actually a team that returns 88% of their scoring from last year's squad. And I understand it's not like last year's squad was really that good or anything, but I feel like in a year of 2020, with the pandemic and the fact that we haven't really had that many practices compared to the normal years, I feel like this could be a year where a team like Missouri could take advantage of that. And throughout the first couple games, they've looked really good. They had a awesome win over Oregon. The game really wasn't that close, and Mark Smith, the Illinois transfer, has been playing great for them. He averaged 17 points, 3 rebounds per game so far this season. Xavier Pinson, Drew Smith, Jeremiah Tillman. Missouri does have a lot of young players that I feel like could be ready to break out at any time. And I feel like if you're looking at Cuonzo Martin and the job he's done since he's gotten to Columbia, this is a big year for him. Because aside from the Michael Porter year, it's been a disappointment for Missouri, and I understand Michael Porter got hurt, but the recruiting hasn't really been up to par, and I find it interesting that Cuonzo has taken this core of young players, and now the time is here where they're going to be seniors, they're going to be juniors, and Missouri looked really good in their 2 games this past week against Oregon and Wichita State. Now, we'll see how legit Missouri is pretty quick, because they do have to play Illinois coming up in December. They open up SEC play against Tennessee. But speaking of the SEC, we're seeing Kentucky. They're not very good. I don't think Florida is very good. So maybe the league is a little bit more wide open than we all thought. And maybe Cuonzo Martin and the Missouri Tigers could take advantage. They had a really, really impressive week. Takeaway number 4. I know that on Tuesday night, everyone was so excited to watch the Champions Classic between Duke and Michigan State, between Kentucky and Kansas, and even though both games were very close, we all saw that the bottom line was that just was not very good basketball. And then on Wednesday night, we see there's the Jimmy V doubleheader between Gonzaga and West Virginia, and Baylor and Illinois, and it's crazy because it wasn't even a question of which doubleheader was better. I think right now, I would take all 4 teams that played in that doubleheader on Wednesday night over any of the teams that played in the doubleheader on Tuesday night. Meaning, right now, I think Gonzaga, West Virginia, Baylor, and Illinois are better than all of Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, and Michigan State. I know Michigan State isn't that bad. They haven't lost yet, and they do have the nice road win at Duke. But watching that game against Duke, my main takeaway was, it was not, Michigan State played really well, and that was a statement win. To be honest, it was kind of similar to Kentucky-Kansas. My main takeaway was, wow, both teams really aren't that good. I'll give props to Michigan State for finding a way to win, but at the same time, they're going to need to do more for me to move the needle. I saw in the AP Top 25, they're ranked number 4. That is a little too high for me because I think the committee values right now a win over Duke a little bit higher than I would. I watched Duke against Michigan State, and I wasn't impressed, and we're going to get to this a little bit later in the show, but the Devils have a huge matchup in the Big Ten ACC tournament against Illinois, ironically one of the teams that played in that Jimmy V Classic, so we'll see what happens. I'm really looking forward to that game, and Duke, they may be in trouble, man. They really didn't look good against Michigan State at all. Takeaway number 5. How about the Marquette Golden Eagles and that crazy buzzer beater they had on Friday night over the Wisconsin Badgers? And I'll say this about that game. I totally understand why everyone is going to say, the refs screwed Wisconsin. You saw in the replay that the clock didn't start on time, or it stopped right in the middle. But at the same time, if you missed the game, here was the scenario, right? Wisconsin was up by 2 with like 10 seconds left. Marquette has the ball. They were up by 1 with like 10 seconds left. Marquette has the ball, they're driving, and Demetric Trice tries to take a charge. And it was called a block, and my issue with the play was it's not like you taking a charge there was going to accomplish anything. If you were trying to stop the offensive player from making the basket, you should have just kept your hands up and played really good defense, and ultimately, that's what cost the Wisconsin Badgers the game. DJ Carton got fouled. He made the first, missed the second, but then my guy, Justin Lewis, tipped it in, and Marquette ended up getting the victory. And I'll say this about the Golden Eagles. I understand they had a tough loss to Oklahoma State at home. It happens. Cade Cunningham is really good. But I was impressed with their game against Wisconsin on Friday night. And in that game, their 2 freshmen, Dawson Garcia and Justin Lewis, were both phenomenal. And I do think if those 2 guys stay in school for the next couple years, by the time they're upperclassmen, juniors and seniors, those 2 guys are going to be scary. And then in terms of this year, you combine those guys with Theo John, a guy that has been around the block for a really long time, Greg Elliott, obviously DJ Carton. Maybe Wojo has something here. I think this is a year that is pretty important for Wojo to prove, okay, I could win without Marcus Howard. And I think so far, yeah, the loss against Oklahoma State is tough, but the win over Wisco is good. That was a solid win by Wojo and Marquette. Takeaway number 6. Props to Travis Steele and Xavier, because I don't know how many of you guys saw this story, but Xavier went into Cincinnati on Sunday and got the job done. They got the W, and I do think they did deserve a lot of credit for that. To be honest, I watched Xavier play a lot of mid-major teams, Eastern Kentucky and Bradley, throughout their first couple of games, and to be honest, they didn't look that impressive at all. They rarely were able to win. But on Sunday, I watched them up close and personal in their game against the Cincinnati Bearcats, and I'm going to be honest, that was not an easy game for them to win. The environment they went into and got the job done was super impressive. Paul Scruggs played like he was legitimately an all-Big East kind of player. I also really like that Xavier got 2 new players eligible for this game, and both of them immediately contributed. You start off with Colby Jones, a freshman that hadn't played throughout the first couple games dealing with COVID. He came off the bench and was phenomenal, and I do think as the season goes on, Jones could be a guy that we're going to have to monitor for the Xavier squad. The Musketeers have lost some talent in their program over the last couple of years, including Najee Marshall early. I do think Colby Jones could be a guy that instantly helps with that for Xavier. And also the kid Adam Kunkel from Belmont, a guy that is just a spot-up three-point shooter. We've seen Xavier in the past go after guys like Ryan Welch from a mid-major level as a knockdown three-point shooter. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. But at the same time, I do feel like if you are a Xavier fan, there are some optimistic takeaways that you can have about this game on Sunday. And I will say this. The last 2 years, I don't think that's a game where Travis Steele Xavier teams win. And the fact that this year he got the job done, Scruggs and Fremantle both played really well, I think Coach Steele and the Muskies deserve a lot of credit for getting the job done. Takeaway number 7. And we're going to get to this a little bit more in detail as the show goes on, but Kentucky is not a good basketball team right now. They will not be ranked in my top 25 if I see them ranked in anyone's top 25. If I see them get a vote, that voter should have his vote rescinded, because watching Kentucky against Georgia Tech, watching Kentucky against Kansas, watching Kentucky against Richmond, they're just not a very good basketball team right now. And I understand why Wildcat fans are frustrated. On Sunday against Georgia Tech, I would have loved to see a much better effort than they showed, because the frustrating thing was it was really there for the taking. There was a legitimate shot. Kentucky could have won that game if midway through the second half they cut it to, I believe, 5, and they just couldn't take advantage of the possible run that was on the table, and Georgia Tech just really bullied them. And Josh Pastner and his squad deserve a lot of credit. The fact that they came out losing their first 2 games of the season to 2 teams in Georgia State and Mercer that really they should be beating every single time they play, and the fact that they come up and respond very nicely, beating Kentucky, that's a good job by Georgia Tech. And if you remember, Georgia Tech last year was a team that I, going into the season, thought could have been a sleeper, but then they get banned from the NCAA tournament because of everything that happened with Wendell Carter and his recruiting visit. And it's unfortunate, because I do think last year, if Georgia Tech was eligible for the tournament, they would have gotten a little more notice. Jose Alvarado's a really good player. Michael DeVoe could really shoot it. Moses Wright played really well in the game yesterday. Bubba Parham, Jordan Usher, Kyle Sturdivant, and Josh Pastner isn't the best coach, but I don't think this is that bad of a Georgia Tech team. I think their record is better than the 1-2 it shows us, and I do think Georgia Tech is going to be a tough out in the ACC. I don't think they're that far off from your teams like Syracuse and Miami and NC State. Takeaway number 8. How about those UConn Huskies? I mean, man, did anyone watch that game against USC on Thursday night? It was an ugly game. I totally understand that. But at the same time, I do think UConn does deserve some credit, because that's a game that throughout many years in the past, they don't always find a way to win. And Coach Danny Hurley said this after the game on his post-game interview. He was like, look, Since I've gotten to UConn, the bottom line is we haven't had that much success during non-conference play. He did have a win over Syracuse at Madison Square Garden his first year, which was nice. But last year, they played Xavier in a preseason tournament, and I just remember them losing a heartbreaking game in overtime. Also, they played Indiana at the Garden. UConn fans definitely remember that game last year. That was the game they should have won. And even though in this game against USC, it's not like their offense played particularly well, but they found a way to win because USC's offense was just as bad. And UConn had some guys step up here. James Bouknight is a legitimate best player on a really good team. I think he's going to be a first-round NBA pick. He's super lengthy, and he has really good skills, and he could really play. You combine him with the play of Isaiah Whaley, who is just your classic college basketball glue guy, the guy that does all of the really little things for UConn, and also Josh Carlton. This guy has really improved so much since Kevin Ollie left and since Coach Hurley has taken over as head coach of the Huskies. When he was playing under Kevin Ollie's first couple years in college, ask most UConn fans, he really wasn't that good. Really wasn't that productive. And at the same time, the fact that only a couple years later, he's been able to really improve under Danny Hurley, that tells you all you need to know. And when you look at the Big East right now, I do think UConn is sitting in a pretty good spot. Bouknight, Whaley, Carlton, they are building something there, along with RJ Cole, the transfer from Howard. He played awesome in the game against USC as well. Takeaway number 9. Props to Kevin Willard and the Seton Hall Pirates. I don't know how many of you guys saw this. So Seton Hall starts off their season, and we all know that going into the season, they lost Miles Powell and Romaro Gill, who were their 2 best players last year, and Quincy McKnight. Their 3 best players Seton Hall loses from last year's squad. And still, even with that being said, there were some expectations for this year's Seton Hall team. And for me, one of the main reasons why was because Kevin Willard is a really good coach. He's consistently shown us the ability to get the job done when, even though not every time the circumstances are in his favor. And in the game against Penn State on Seton Hall starts their season losing a really tough game to Louisville. They then get demolished by Oregon on Friday night, and I watched that game. The game was never close. Seton Hall really never had it in reach. But then on Sunday, in the first half, they're getting ran out of the gym by Penn State, and then somehow, some way, they find a way to win. They were down by like 15, 16 points early in the first half, and still on the road in a game where the Pirates did not lead at all, basically. They had a lead for 1 minute the whole game. They found a way to win, and that is what good coaches do, going on the road in a war and finding a way to win. And Sandro Mamukelashvili was phenomenal. He ended with 30 points. That's his career high. And that kid is another guy that could be an all Big East kind of player. Jared Rhoden played great. How about Shavar Reynolds? There are not many guys in college basketball that I would want the ball in their hands in crunch time more than Shavar Reynolds. He's a really good defender as well. And I think he's done a lot of really good things for the Seton Hall team, and especially was one of the main reasons why they were able to come through against Penn State on Sunday night. Great job by the Seton Hall Pirates. And then finally, takeaway number 10. Keep your eye out on the Indiana Hoosiers, because I watched them play in the North Carolina tournament, Maui, over the week. And even though they didn't win the tournament, they went 2-1. I was really impressed with what they were able to do. I understand they got blown out by Texas, and if you are a fan of Indiana, I get it. You never want to get blown out by anyone. But at the same time, I do think there was some optimism to be taken away from Indiana's performance in Asheville. They faced Providence, and to be honest, that's a game that many of Archie Miller's teams in the past, since he's gotten to Indiana, have lost. That was a game that I thought going in was pretty 50-50. I think Indiana is a smidge more talented, but we all know just how tough Ed Cooley and his Providence teams always are, and still the Hoosiers were able to find a way to win. Now, unfortunately, they got smacked against Texas. It happens, but to be honest, after that Texas game, I was very curious to see how exactly they would come out against Stanford. And keep in mind, this is a Stanford team that blew out Alabama and could have easily beaten North Carolina the previous 2 days, and still the Hoosiers took it to them. Trace Jackson Davis, that was the best game I've ever seen him play. Right now, he's looking like a guy who could possibly be an All-American, at the least an All-Big Ten kind of player. I've been really impressed with what Armand Franklin has been able to do. He's one of the more improved players I've seen in the country so far. Finney and Al Durham continue to get the job done. If you're a Hoosiers fan, you want to get a little more from Jerome Hunter, but at the same time, I like these two freshmen they got as well, Geronimo and Galloway. I think both those kids have a legitimate future, and I do think the Hoosiers are a team to watch. We'll talk about them a little bit more in depth when we go over the Big Ten ACC Challenge predictions during the last segment of this show, but I just wanted to give a shout out to Indiana and the way they played in Asheville over the weekend.